So, David, you have a really important investigative piece over at the American Prospect, prospect.org, that you've written that has garnered a lot of attention this week. It centers around the CARES Act payments. Specifically, what payments are we talking about in regards to the CARES Act?
Right. So these are the direct payments that were authorized for $1,200 per person. It's means tested. So if you make more than $75,000 a year, it's less, and then it phases out at $100,000. But in general, $1,200 per person that have begun to go out this week in direct deposit to millions of individuals all over the country.
And if you have direct deposit, it's because you've established an account with the IRS. So you consider yourself one of the lucky ones, because if you're waiting for a check, they can only print like 20 million checks per week. And if we're talking about several hundred million people, you're going to wait anywhere from a couple to like 8 weeks.
Yeah, well, they've actually said even longer. The Treasury has indicated that if you have to wait for a check, you could wait as long as August or September for this $1,200, which is supposed to be emergency funds that goes to help buy necessities in the immediate term. So obviously, it's a better deal to speed this relief out through direct deposit if you have established that relationship with the IRS. But like with everything in America, there's a catch.
There's a catch, because I thought I would be super psyched to have a direct deposit, but then we head over to the American Prospect and we find out, oh, wait a second, this money isn't necessarily for you. Explain.
Right. So there is basically this direct payment is estimated as a tax credit. That's how it's treated. It's an advance effectively on a tax refund, and for that reason, it is not exempt from various types of debt collection. So there are exemptions in the law for if state and federal agencies want to take this money. They are not allowed unless it's for child support payments. However, that exemption was not extended to private debt collectors, and it was really not extended to banks, the banks that receive the direct deposit. So let's say you bank with a bank, you have your direct deposit information on file with the IRS. They send the $1,200 to you through your bank, but you also have a delinquent loan with that bank, or you have overdraft charges with that bank. That bank can take that payment, and the technical term is offset. They can use that money to offset your existing debt with that bank. And I obtained audio that was a webinar between regulators and bank compliance officers, where the regulatory official from the Treasury Department said, there's nothing in the law that precludes you from taking this money. Basically kicked it over to the banks to make the decision of whether they want to take this emergency payment that's supposed to go for food and medicine and necessities and use it to offset existing debts.
And this is like a double whammy, because if you are somebody who has existing debt, chances are your need for this $1,200 is that much greater.
Well, that's absolutely correct. And that's why typically on a lot of federal benefit payments, things like Social Security, veterans benefits, disability benefits, those payments are flagged that they cannot be taken by debt collectors, whether it's a bank or whether it's a private debt collector that gets an order from a judge that they can garnish your bank account, which is something that is often done. If it's a federal benefit, there are certain benefits that cannot be taken in that fashion. So your Social Security check that gets deposited, that cannot be taken by your bank or a debt collector. This $1,200 payment, which seemingly is also a federal benefit, was not designated in that fashion by Congress, which makes it susceptible to being taken away by the bank. Treasury has the ability to write a rule and flag that payment. They can say, okay, the $1,200 payment, that's the same as we treat Social Security or veterans benefits. That is flagged. You cannot take that payment, you bank or private debt collector. They have chosen not to do so. And what this webinar audio shows is that they don't want to get involved. They're just saying, look, there's nothing that precludes you from doing that. You consult with your own legal officers at the bank. Don't involve us. And if you want to take the money, go ahead. It was essentially a green light to these banks to do whatever they want with these payments.
So clearly not an oversight type of situation. This is clearly a situation of, at the very least, a malignant neglect, I guess. But so
yeah, it's gross negligence. I mean, it is totally negligent for Congress not to flag these payments to begin with, A, and B, for Treasury, which has the opportunity written into the law to write regulations to flag these payments, for them to not do so. So this is a colossal failure of both the legislative and executive branch to not protect this money from greedy, predatory financial institutions or financial actors with their eyes on this money that is supposed to be an emergency payment to people who are struggling to survive.
Do you have a sense that this was a provision or a lack of a provision that was lobbied for, or was this just one of those things of like, oh, nobody thought about it and whatever?
Well, I guess I would say it was an oversight. However, there was a change made, as I mentioned before, to state and federal agency debt collection, where it said that, yes, we're not going to take those payments if unless they're child support payments. We are not going to collect on these $1,200 checks if the money is owed to a federal or state agency. That means they were aware of the problem, right? I mean, if Congress legislated on that, they could have just as easily applied that restriction to the private debt collection industry, and they chose not to do it.
Now, the implications of it being a tax credit, does that mean that there's some opportunity for people to have it clawed back by the federal government in the event that they don't have, I guess, a rebate due them? Or is it just simply like an earned income tax credit, essentially just like a grant?
Yeah, I mean, that's a little bit unclear to me in the law. I believe that people are going to get this payment, but I've also seen reporting that this will be sort of an advance against a refund in a future year, and your refund will just be $1,200 less in 2021. But I think the reason it was designated as a tax credit is so that the IRS could handle distribution. I mean, that was the main reason, because the IRS is seen as more efficient and more able to handle hundreds of millions of payments and do direct deposit, because they have some direct deposit information for 50, 70 million households or something like that. But there are downsides to designating this as a tax credit, obviously. And one that we got into in the piece that is even stranger is that people have all these relationships set up with their tax refunds where they go through tax preparation companies, these little fly-by-night companies. And in those cases, the refunds are given to temporary bank accounts. and then the tax preparer takes out their fee and gives the refund out of that bank account over to the individual. That means that the bank account is essentially a zombie dormant bank account, and that's what's on file with the IRS. So the IRS might be sending these $1,200 payments into these dormant bank accounts that are controlled by these fly-by-night tax preparers that aren't necessarily obligated to then turn over that money to the individual who's supposed to receive the payment. So this is messed up on a whole bunch of different levels.
It sounds to me just like an enormous incompetence, right? I mean, because to what aim would this possibly achieve for anybody, right? I mean, where it's like this money is supposed to get out the door, and they have so incompetently delivered it, and it raises just a fundamental problem that we're going to have in this country recovering from the economic shock here and from mitigating the economic shock, which is that we have no infrastructure to provide this type of relief to the American public. And, today, I should say we're recording this midweek here, and this week there's been a lot of talk. The Trump administration rejected the bailout for the post office. And immediately I thought of the probably, 500 interviews you and I have done about postal banking over the years, and how not only is it obscene, the idea that they would privatize the post office, which I don't think they'll do. I think this is a bunch of posturing, my hope anyways. But had we got, back during the Obama years, postal banking, we would have had a function, some type of functional means that we could scale up immediately to provide relief to people directly. And yet we are stuck. I mean, this whole problem strikes me as having to go through the banks. The same thing with the small business loans, that they're the only game in town. These banks, they're not cohesive in any way in the way they approach this. They're all looking for an angle on the way that they're going to profit from it. And then you've got people who are like, well, I'm going to use this to collect debt. And this is one of the biggest problems that we're facing now in terms of addressing this economic crap storm that we're headed into.
Well, you're absolutely right. And it's sad to say that the IRS is probably the most competent of these delivery systems that we have set up. And we're seeing the pitfalls of it right now. I mean, you compare that to the Small Business Administration and the botched rollout that they've been doing with these Paycheck Protection Program loans for small businesses, or you look at state unemployment insurance systems, which are absolutely buckling under the pressure of millions and millions of people filing for unemployment. The IRS is actually, relative to those, a somewhat competent system for delivering this relief. Millions and millions of people are going to get these checks within just a couple weeks of the bill passing, but even it is inadequate, and even it has these quirks to it where private banks can prosper. So you're absolutely right to say that we don't have the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, to deal with speeding relief to people, individuals, and small businesses. Now, we have plenty of infrastructure through the Federal Reserve to get hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars to the largest corporations in America. They get the velvet rope. We get the creaky dump truck that is delivering the relief to us. So this crisis is exposing these cracks in the system, and this is just one.
And while we're at it, I mean, let's just mention, there is a phase 4, I guess it is, the bill that is starting to be contemplated. The Democrats are floating the idea of basically subsidizing COBRA payments for people who have lost their jobs so they get health insurance. And it's the exact same problem. Like, we don't have a mechanism in which that we can get everyone on a health insurance program, because it's such a patchwork and so like lacking cohesion.
I mean,
that the best we can do is say, go on Cobra, we'll pay for it. And we're paying basically like, I don't know, $1.50 on the dollar for that.
yeah, it's outrageous rates. It might be able to be smoothly administered because everyone on Cobra, got it through their employer, and their employer presumably has their information to get them that money. But yeah, we're wildly overpaying for Cobra, and it's a backdoor bailout of the health insurance industry to pay these elevated charges to private insurers. So this crisis once again shows that public systems, which are more efficient, often cheaper to deliver, are what's sorely lacking in the United States.
David Dayen, the piece is at the American Prospect. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.